Time now for the news review of this bulletin. Hello, welcome to the news review. The European Union's Statistics Agency says that China overtook the US as the bloc's biggest trading partner last year. According to the Eurostat, the trade volume with China hit $711 billion in 2020, compared to $673 billion for the US. The data also shows that EU exports to China rose by 2.2%, while at the same time imports from the country increased by 5.6%. This comes as the bloc's exports to the US fell by 13.2% in the same period, while imports dropped by 8.2%. Transatlantic trade between the US and EU has been impaired in recent months by a series of tit-for-tat tariffs on a range of products. Jerome Hughes is correspondent joining us from Brussels, and we also have JohnRoss, Senior Fellow of the Chungyang Institute for Financial Studies, joining us from London. Okay, Jerome, first over to you. Maybe this shouldn't come so much of a surprise based on the current U.S. President Joe Biden's predecessor in the way that he dealt with the European Union. So I'm guessing some reactions from the EU are blaming him, i.e. Donald Trump, for this.
That's right, Cave. Well, you know, there are some recent history events that certainly feed into these figures. I mean, you'll remember when COVID-19 really started to impact on the European Union last March, the EU had to import huge amounts of medical supplies and high-end medical equipment from China in terms of ventilators and so on. So that certainly would skew the figures somewhat. And then at the same time, you have the tensions between the EU and the United States because of Donald Trump, the sort of mini trade war that he created on some high-end goods, which would have an impact. And also generally with the COVID-19, I mean, these figures relate to 2020, so you had a situation where there was trade was impacted in terms of restrictions and so on. But you also have some major underlying health conditions, economic health conditions in the European Union, because for years we've been talking about the need, business employers have been talking about the need for a reform of the education systems in the European Union to meet the demands of employers in terms of this digital age. I mean, if you look at just before, even before the pandemic came along, we had youth unemployment in Greece running at close to 50%. And it's defined in the EU, youth unemployment is defined as being between 18, so young adults 18 to 25. And also Italy, it was close to 30% or just over 30%. So for example, I mean, if you're a high-tech firm and you need highly skilled young workers, they want highly skilled young workers, enthusiastic but highly educated, are you going to locate in Greece or Italy, or are you going to go somewhere like China or another Asian country? So there is a major competitive issue with the European Union, and they've known about this for years. So the education systems need major reforms. So while this might seem like sort of an immediate problem due to recent historical events in terms of COVID-19 and Donald Trump, there's actually a medium to long-term issue here for the European Union, and they need to get their act together. That's what experts have been saying for many years. But there are also those who are very, really upset about the potential rise of China. They want the status quo. I'm talking about big business interests, could be in the energy sector, could be, you know, could actually be major political parties or industries that are very influential. They want to this situation where you have the European Union, the United States and the UK having a dominant position on whole many fronts and trying to sort of oppress countries in South America and in Africa and in the Middle East and of course Russia. And so they're actually very concerned about the rise of China.
Well, that's the whole thing here, JohnRoss, in a sense, the rise of China, because we're looking at a recent report, if you recall, it came out days ago, that said that China will overtake the U.S. economy by the year 2028, but there's some that have speculated that China has already done that. Is this particular news a sign of that?
Well, whether China's economy is overtaking the U.S. or not depends on which way you measure it. If you measure it in current dollars, then the U.S. economy is still bigger. But if you measure it in terms of real prices, that is real volumes of goods, what economists are called purchasing parity powers, then China is already the largest economy in the world. But I think also these figures are affected by the immediate situation, which is not just about the trade war. If you take the IMF, because the China's economy has responded so much better to the threat of COVID-19 than the US, if you take the IMF's projections, I'm not always a fan of the IMF, but it can't be accused of being biased in favor of China. it projects that in 2020 to 2021, 60% of world economic growth will take place in China. That is, more growth will take place in China than in the rest of the world put together. And the US will account for only 10% of growth in this period. So therefore, it's not really the short-term trade war. It's also the fact that China has dealt so much better with the COVID epidemic and its economic consequences. That's what's really behind these figures.
Do we get a sense, Jerome Hughes, from the European Union of which way they're going to go when it comes to trade? I mean, are they going to look at China more than the US? Any indications there?
Well, the thing about it is the European Union talks a lot, and perhaps it talks too much without taking action. So what we've been hearing about in recent years is that they want to build their own, effectively their own EU army. So they want to become less dependent on the United States. They want to become more autonomous, also in terms of their economy, in terms of trying to train young people up for the digital age, which is here to stay. There's this big transition from, the energy supplies that we're used to more renewable energies and so on. So they're talking a lot about this, but the problem is it takes a lot of time. So the likes of China is, you could say, argue almost decades ahead of the European Union in this regard. So the European Union has all these ambitions to become a major competitive force, but you just have to be concerned that other areas of the world are progressing more quickly in terms of, as I say, meeting the needs of employers and so on. So they do have a lot of plans in place, but how long are they going to be? How long is it going to take to implement them? And what's going to happen in the interim period? I mean, I think we're going to see, in terms of the economic impact of COVID-19, I don't think we've seen anything yet in terms of the real impact, because the frustration of citizens when they see other countries doing so well with the vaccination program, and yet we're looking at a situation, they're talking here that we've got major restrictions in place for another year, when other countries might be opening up before the summer or during the coming summer. And the political fallout from that, how are people going to vote? We saw the situation in Spain, Catalonia, and the elections there, growing support. As these general elections come along in the European Union, how are people going to vote when they see how this COVID-19 crisis has been handled? That, I think, is the number one problem for the European Union at the moment, economically.
JohnRoss, you said that in the year 2021, China, I believe the figure that you've thrown was 61% of world trade is going to be focused there, or is going to be a result of this. What will the U.S. do?
61% of world growth, not of world trade.
Growth. Okay. Yeah, big difference. Okay, so if the U.S. looks at that stat, what do you think they want to do in order to either catch up or try to overtake the China, given, of course, the harsh realities of COVID-19 in that country?
Well, the U.S. has got a big problem because its economy has been slowing down for at least 50 years. If you go back to 1969, the U.S. economy average annual growth rate was about 4.4%. Now it's 2%. So the problem is that the U.S. can't speed itself up. It's adopted what somebody quite rightly called the Tonya Harding tactic. That Tonya Harding attempted to get, or her team attempting to get, a physical attack on Nancy Corrigan, who was another skater, which what it really means is, as the U.S. can't accelerate its own economy, it's trying to slow down China's economy. But the problem is it's impossible. China is not even waiting to be open. China has already opened internally, even before the vaccines there. Its lockdown program was extremely effective. It got the virus under control in about 6 weeks. And life in most of China and most of China's economy is already proceeding perfectly normally. We're at least a year away from that in the United States. So the US is not attempting to speed up its own economy much, or it's not going to successfully do so. It's merely trying to slow down China, but it's not really having very much success in that at the present time, as these data on trade show.
Thank you so much for that, JohnRoss, Senior Fellow at Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies. Jerome Hughes, a pleasure to see you, a correspondent there from Brussels. And that does it for our news review. Thanks for tuning in.